What is ego? What is true self? Is having an ego bad? How do I completely get rid of my ego? What is the difference between ego and self respect? How do I find my true self? These are some questions that you might have, and I had them too. The ego is the student, and the true self is the teacher. Let me explain. So, you might have seen a lot of videos where people talk about the ego as something bad, and they tell you that it's something you have to completely get rid of. But that is almost impossible to do at once. So, what is the ego really? Here's my definition. When you act from your ego, it leaves you with a negative feeling. So, let's say, for example, you had an argument with someone close to you, and slowly you started developing anger, and you said things which you didn't really mean. And after you stopped arguing, when you began to reflect, you started having a feeling of regret and guilt. That's when you know that you were acting from your ego. The ego is something that you've developed through external factors. These are things that people have told you about yourself ever since you were young. And over time, you've started believing that those things are true. Let's say you've always been told that you're someone intelligent. And whether you've been able to prove it or not, you've always believed that to be true. Let's say people have always told you that you are a shy person. And without realizing it, without checking within you, you began to believe that about yourself. But if you're not that what people have told you are, what is your true self? So when you act from your true self, you're not left with any negative emotions. Acting from your true self leaves you stable and calm. Let's say, for example, you have a friend who constantly keeps giving you advice because they believe that you're a shy person. But one day you decide to speak up and you tell them that you don't really need their advice because you know exactly what you want to do. And when you began to reflect on that, you felt a sense of fulfillment and peace that you took that action. And that just means that this came from your true self. This is the kind of person that you are meant to be. This is not external. This is internal. So your ego is like a young student who hasn't really experienced life, but he just wants to go out there and do everything that he feels like, whether it might be right for him or not. Like, for example, a young student is attracted to fire and he goes and touches it and immediately feels a sense of regret and pain. But before he did that, there was a silent voice in his head which was telling him, don't do that. It's dangerous. And that is the voice of your true self, the teacher. The teacher that is trying to teach the student, the ego, what is right for you. But a lot of people these days have begun to believe everything that they've been told about themselves. And so they walk around with this huge ego of who they think they are. So your ego might tell you that you're too intelligent to do a particular job. And you act from your ego and you decide to quit. But when you begin to reflect, it leaves you with that negative feeling of regret and having to question yourself. And at that point, the true self comes out and tells you that that was something that you needed to do in order to let go of that part of your ego. So every point lost for your ego is 1 point gained for your true self. And this is part of life. To let go of your ego one by one and to start increasing your true self one by one. And eventually completely eliminating your ego and discovering your true self. When you act from your ego, you're constantly blaming your surroundings for your situations. You're constantly acting from negative emotions of anger, sadness, guilt, regret, etc. And every action that you take from your ego leaves you with this sense of unfulfillment. Even if you achieved everything that you wanted to achieve, and you made a lot of money. You got all the materialistic things you desired, but you still feel empty inside. That's because you were acting from your ego and not your true self. So if there is any of you who have watched the anime Naruto, I believe that the creator of Naruto could be a genius, because the entire story of Naruto kind of explains the struggle of the ego and the true self and how to conquer the ego. As soon as Naruto is born, the soul of an evil demon called the Nine-Tailed Fox is stored inside him. And as he grows up, he begins to realize the presence of that Nine-Tailed Fox within him, which can be thought of as the ego. And when he starts talking to the ego, initially his true self was not completely developed. So he would be taken over by the Nine-Tailed Fox, and he would land himself in bad situations. He would destroy everything around him because he was acting from his ego. But as he started to talk to his ego, he learned to conquer the voice of the Nine-Tailed Fox. And despite what the fox told him, he would do what is right for him. So every time he could feel himself be taken over by the fox, he would catch himself and he would realize that this is the voice of the ego, the fox, that is talking, and not the true self. And the soul of the fox was extremely powerful. So over time, he learned to tame that voice of the fox, and he incorporated the power of the fox in his true self and became the most powerful man in the village. He conquered everything there is to conquer, and the fox, or the voice of his ego, became his friend. And in the end, the soul of the fox left his body and came out in the physical form. So all Naruto was left was with his true self. And I'm not sure if this is what the writer was trying to convey, but this is a concept which I derived, and I think it fits perfectly in this situation. Every time you're taken over by a negative emotion like anger, sadness, guilt, etc., if you can just catch yourself at that moment and you can realize that you're acting from your ego and not from your true self, then I think you're already on the right path. You've already begun to recognize the difference between the ego and the true self. And so the journey of your life involves getting rid of your ego one by one and increasing your true self simultaneously, and eventually getting rid of your ego completely and living life as your true self, in that state where everything you do and every action you perform leaves you only with a sense of fulfillment, peace and calm. You're always stable because you're not acting from your ego, you're acting from your true self. Your true self is completely internal. It is the voice of your soul which is guiding you to your right path. But since most of us have been living externally and believing our ego as real, we've lost the connection with that voice of our true self. So every time you're doubtful about your actions, just ask yourself, what kind of feeling will I be left with if I go ahead with this? Will it be a negative feeling, or will I feel fulfilled and peaceful if I go ahead with this action? And when you get the answer, you will know exactly what to do. So I hope you guys found this video helpful. And if you have any thoughts about this idea, feel free to leave a comment down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.